Welcome, everyone, to a super special edition of Tell Me Why. I am so excited. And I want to start off with a quote from a review that I did of a fascinating new book that you are going to have to read. Here's how it started. The Beatles were undeniably four of the beautiful people. Their haircuts, and sometimes outrageous sense of style established the lads as chic 60s trendsetters. In her new book, Fashioning the Beatles, The Looks That Shook the World, Deirdre Kelly examines each season of the Liverpool lads' Pied Piper journey to the toppermost of the propermost as they led Beatlemaniacs and later the entire Flower Power generation in a chic expression of self. And that's exactly what they did. And you can read the rest of that review on culturesonar.com. Ordinarily, when you give an introduction, you save the name of the person for the very, very end. But I'm going to reveal who it is from the beginning of this introduction because Deirdre Kelly is a treat. She breathes rare air. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, she's been writing since 1985 about music and dance and pop culture, and most people can't be an expert in all of those areas, but she is because she was asked by the Globe and Mail to be their music critic, and she was asked by London's Dance Gazette to be their dance critic. Who can do both of those things? She immerses herself in the arts. She also is an investigative reporter, and she wrote a book that was shocking and yet gave you empathy for this person, this character, this genre, this ideal. She wrote a book called Ballerina, Sex, Scandal, and Suffering. In the symbol of perfection, you think of that ballerina being just like an ice maiden, but it wasn't that. And it was released to rave reviews. And then, yay, in the autumn of 2023, she joined the Beatles world and became part of our Beatles family when she wrote this gorgeous book, Fashioning the Beatles. It is an amazing book. It's hardcover. From the minute that you open the book and you look at the beautiful inside, the artistic layout of it, even before you get to the title page, you can tell that it's special. Here is that title page. And then we are going to be going through it today and giving you glimpses of the wonderful black and white and color photos. No expense was spared on producing this gorgeous book. A lot of the photos I had never even seen before. There's one of John in here that I hadn't encountered before, and that's saying something. Some of them you've seen before, but not all. And we're going to go through it with you. Look at this gorgeous picture of Brian, of course. It is such a gorgeous book, and it is about a subject that had never been covered before. So much so important that Mark Lewison endorsed it heartily. And that's kind of all you need to say about a book. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome to Tell Me Why my friend and the very brilliant author of Fashioning the Beatles, Deirdre Kelly. Deirdre, welcome to the show.
Oh boy, thank you, Jude. I'm blushing behind the sweater of mine. Thank you so much for such a generous, gorgeous introduction, and your praise means so much to me.
Well, it is a great book, and you were such a wonderful addition to the Beatles family. We're so glad to have you, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that you're going to be in Chicago at the Fest for Beatles fans.
Well, I hope I can make it, yes, and see you again.
It would be so good. Well, I want to emphasize to everyone listening that your book wasn't released until the autumn of 2023.
That's
And
right.
that is a full 60 years after the autumn of 1963, when Beatlemania broke out for the very first time. So that's 60 years. And in those 60 years, guys, let me show you just some of the books. You can see behind me, and they're surrounding me. They're all around me. You can't see that, but there are books about their music, both together and solo. There are books about their instruments.
Mhm.
There are books about the collectibles that, Celtab released. There are biographies, like you can see Hunter Davies' biography back there of the Beatles, and mine. This is Shades of Life, Volume 5, about John Solo. There are books about their tours. This is Ira Davis's book because he toured with the Beatles for the entire time in 1964. There are books about their fans and the fan club. Sarah Schmidt's great book, Dear Beatles People. Never in that 60 years was there a book about their style and the impact that their style had on fans. Deirdre, tell me why in the world no one had ever done this and why you decided to tackle it.
Well, it is a conundrum, or had been a conundrum for me too. I have to tell you, when I did get the idea, and maybe we can maybe talk about how I got the idea. I kept kind of, in fact, I was writing most of it at this dining room table where I'm talking to you from right now, and I'm alone. But every so often I have to lift my head up and scan the room. Is anyone else looking? Is anybody else seeing this? Because it was like finding treasure, on the ground, and a big hunk of treasure. And you kept thinking, how come nobody else has seen this? How come nobody else has picked this up? So it kept befuddling even me, which actually also was an impetus to keep going, because there were a lot of challenges in doing the book. But so to answer the question, even for myself, maybe I'll take a bigger view here. It's about the subject of fashion itself. In terms of an academic study, it tends to be very low on the rung of the academic ladder. Not that I've written an academic book, but let's say, maybe I should say intellectual ladder, or is it serious enough? And I think there's been a misunderstanding about the importance of fashion. People tend to see it as superficial, or it has tended to be seen as superficial, that it literally is just a covering, that it doesn't go more than skin deep. But I'm hoping what my book does establish is that in the story of the Beatles, clothing was so important, in not just clothing, but accessories, styling, grooming, every aspect of the appearance, and to create an image that not only defined the band, which you could also say brand, perhaps give them a brand identity, but goes on to, as you said earlier in the introduction, goes on to define a generation, and if not, give the entire 1960s, a whole new gloss, a whole new appearance in the world. And so that is very true about the Beatles. And then when I look at the individual clothing choices, you can see that they were never just happenstance. Actually, the Beatles were very deliberate, and they were very much in control of what they wanted to wear, how they wanted to be seen, very self-conscious about it. And so to me, their clothing, and as a study of fashion, is as important as their music, is as important as their gear, and all other aspects of study of the Beatles, because the fashion is quite literally a piece of material culture. It is an artifact that will withstand the test of time for deeper inquiry.
I,
And
I agree.
yes, so that, in a way, maybe it's a little heavy, but it's because I gave it a lot of thought, as to why. And there could be a sense too that, let's face it, there's been a tendency for Beatles authors to be more male than female. And I'm thinking at one point, that perhaps men, even though I know they're all very attracted to the Beatles look, maybe they felt it was something they couldn't quite discuss in a way that they'd feel comfortable discussing.
That's right.
So it's multifaceted, I would say.
I'm going to skip the next part. I want to come back to it, but I want to follow up on what you just said, the importance of the fashion and the look, and then we'll come back to that follow-up question. And So Maureen Cleave, and you quote her, this is directly from your book, who wrote for the London Evening Standard. And for those of you who don't know Maureen, she was one of the few reporters, along with Ray Coleman, that the Beatles really trusted. In fact, John trusted her so much that he probably said more than he should have in January of 1966, which ultimately landed him in a world of trouble. But they trusted her, and she always was so on point in what she said about them. And in one of the very early articles that she wrote, she said, I think it's their looks that really get people going, that start the girls queuing outside at 5:30 for an 8 p.m. show. Their looks is what she's emphasizing. And she wasn't the only one. Deirdre quotes so many people that said the same thing in the early 60s. So the girls are going mad over the Beatles collectively, and they always have a favorite that they choose, that individual look that she's talking about. And boys who don't want to discuss it are copying their hairstyle and their fashion and their instruments and the sunglasses. So go ahead and take us through. And I've got the book, and Deirdre is going to be discussing a photo on a particular page. And after she discusses it, I'm going to be showing it to you. So let's talk about that. And then we'll go back and talk about how you found all this out and the research and all that.
Oh my goodness, a bit of a tall order. Yeah, this idea about Maureen Cleave, and I'm so glad that you mentioned her. And it was very interesting, by the way. Her newspaper was one of the first in Britain to realize the importance of a new aspect in the culture, which was menswear and men's appearance, which hadn't been foregrounded in the culture since maybe Beau Brummel in the 18th century. So she was also significant, not just being a Beatles insider, but also the publication that hired her. And indeed, she did underscore that she thought it was maybe their looks, that's getting fans to queue up, quite early for a late night show. And also Frida Kelly, right at the very beginning, she talked about, people who know the film, good old Frida will remember that she said it was everything about the way they dressed, so it was always foregrounded, but maybe not especially highlighted, as we say in other studies. And that was, I think, because the Beatles were, it's a word now, it's overused today, authentic. They were absolutely themselves. They were curious and genuinely, wanting to be different and to stand apart from the crowd. And so fashion for them, or dressing a certain way for them, was very important in order to give themselves a distinctive look. And because it was a pure extension really of them, because sometimes at the very beginning, especially, they were dressing in ways that wasn't even considered fashionable. They were dressing in ways, as I say, they wanted to be distinctive, because suits for bands were de rigueur in the day. And the Beatles really studied the competition. You had very flash, you had very gimmicky suits. Think of Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. And then the Beatles understood this, and they go in a completely opposite direction. They went quite smart, quite sophisticated, very tailored, but they were always influenced by street style. And that is all the way through the entire story of the Beatles in terms of their clothing. And so when you even have the sophisticated suits, the trousers are cut very narrow. And that is a teddy boy, a trend or nod to that influence, which was if your listeners don't know, it was a post-war British youth subculture that used fashion in a very ironic and sarcastic way. And the Beatles really loved that subversive aspect. So even I kind of was saying that there was always a bit of a rebel yell in the lapel. So even when they were quite posh, or seemingly quite posh looking, there was always a whiff of danger about them, and especially the high-heeled boots. So there might be an image of that somewhere, but it was instantly influential. Even when the Beatles showed up in their suits for the first time at the Cavern Club, there was a young band, the Mersey Beats, because people were just going ape over them, right? Like what Frida said, it was everything about them. And so it was that kind of started early with other bands wanting to emulate their mode of dress because it was like, well, maybe some of the magic will rub off. And that goes right through to, end of the 70s with the Knack, and then even more recently with BTS, other bands dressing a la Beatles in order to, you know, kind of make it, or it was almost talismanic. There would be this kind of power behind the clothing. So it starts kind of that way, that other bands start emulating them. Fans want to dress like them as well. And then, of course, retailers and manufacturers are cottoning on to, wow, what is this influence in our midst? Which is what inspires the Beatles to become the biggest trendsetters of their generation, even though they didn't plan it. So we talked about some of the looks there. I don't know if you can find some images right at the beginning where they're very let's see what we've got here. Oh yes, this is almost like pre-Hamburg, right around the Hamburg time, and this George Harrison with his wonderful hair and his black leather and his smirk, that insouciance that's there. And the reason I put this picture is to show that the Beatles actually at their core were quite raw and savage, and they used clothing. I think that was, to me, Brian Epstein's biggest contribution in terms of not forcing them into suits because, hey, everybody, Paul McCartney had them dressing in suits before they went to Hamburg. But it's that idea that you could use suiting to maybe create an identity for yourself.
Yeah.
And so
I'm gonna for this to show up, I'll have to talk for just a second so that everybody can see it. And I apologize to our listeners on Beatlesorama Radio who won't be able to see these images. But guys, you want to know a great way to be able to see the images? Buy the book. It is great. I promise you, you will not regret it. Okay, go ahead and give me the next one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think in terms of if we're going sequentially. And that's how I structured the book, by the way. I had a little bit of pushback at the beginning from some people when I was talking to them. They go, oh, that's so boring to do it chronologically. But I wanted to do it chronologically because this was part of my point, is that the look evolved with the sound. And it became, as I mentioned, a pure extension, not just of them as individuals, but of their artistic evolution. So you have constant change. And in a way, the Beatles become symbolic of fashion itself, which is always a pursuit of the new. Yes, I'll just say it and then I'll be quiet. But the reason we've looked at this picture here, this is in the present day. This is the Paris runway in the early 2000s. And it's a designer named Hedi Slimane who designed for Yves Saint Laurent, for Dior, and Celine. And you can see he's even chosen a model who looks like George, and he's replicated that black leather jacket. This designer in particular, and there are many top-ranking designers, are constantly plummeting through the Beatles' closet for design ideas in the present day.
And here's the image for everyone. And those of you on the radio, again, I'm sorry, but this is a fantastic leather suited look that looks very much like George. Years and years later, what year would this be, Deirdre?
As I say, I think it's like 2010. And,
yeah.
And then I have other images in the book, just we don't have to show them, but just to bring it right to the present day. Even Anna Sui, I think in near pandemic time, she's doing a Beatles inspired collection, and it's not slavishly copying collarless suits or Beatle boots. Oh yes, and here this I'll talk and then I'll be quiet. But to show quite quickly the immediate impact of Beatles style on youth culture. So this here is an image of youth in a dance club in London, and there's a collarless jacket. There's those tight pants that were imitated from the Teddy Boy drain pipe trousers. There are Beatle boots. And you can see instantly how Beatles style became the style of the 1960s.
Yeah, here's the picture for those of you seeing this on video. And I think of that trip that Stu made back to Liverpool wearing that collarless,
Yeah.
fitless suit, and how Paul laughed at him and said, "What is that, your sister's suit?" And Stu said, "Yeah, you're going to be wearing this very soon because Brian has already gotten with me to talk about making suits like this for you." And so, from Stu, we have a lot of Beatles influence coming from the Beatle who really did vanish into death, Stu Sutcliffe.
Yeah, and then actually, we have to now give credit to Astrid because I identify her, even though I really make the case, I think that the Beatles were no marketing man's puppet. They couldn't be told what to do, even if you tried. Look at George Martin, even with a first, offering of a single. No, thanks, we're going to do our own, right? And that could have been spelled disaster for them. That's you got to remember these guys did only what they wanted to do when they wanted to do. This is a great image of the Beatles. Once they start to make it, they kind of glom onto sophistication, urbane sophistication quite quickly. Remember, everybody, they're from the bombed out port city of Liverpool. They're all war babies. They're kind of, scrappy rockers. And then as soon as they start getting that whiff of success, they're dressing for success. And here you can see them really togged out in Carnaby Street Specials, which is a continental style jacket known as a bum freezer. That was more from, when I say continental, meaning more France and Italy, not British. And then you've got what they call penny collars, the rounded shapes, and you've got the skinny black tie. And then, of course, you've got those Beatle boots, elongated toe to accentuate the long, lean line they wanted in their clothing.
Yeah, and here is the image for those of you on the video. And, so posh. And even John is wearing the suit and his tie. And this picture is all the way up for once. He usually has it loosened.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he may rebel in his heart, but he was going full throttle for what they said to do.
Yeah. And in fact, I took pains to kind of examine that, because let's face it, John is famously mercurial. It depended on the kind of time of day. He might say one thing and then he'd say the absolute opposite, and you just had to take it with a grain of salt sometimes. But that's why I looked at it, and then I read very intensely the anthology because I wanted them in their own words. Yeah, and it's their hair as well, brushed forward. It wasn't so much the length of it, but the idea that you brushed it forward over the forehead. That was considered very déclassé in the day. And again, this is an influence that John, especially a Francophile, over in Paris, and he's with Paul, and they noticed that their greased back Tony Curtis looks weren't pulling the girls. So they went to Jürgen Bohmer, who was Astrid's friend, also a photographer, then living in a hotel on the Rue de Bonne. That's all credit to Mark Lewison's sleuthing, where the famous Beatles haircut took place, and then said, right, push it forward, because it was the style in Paris. And then it caught on to all the Beatles, and it becomes a signature look, and you can really see it there.
And here is the look. And, you think about the fact that Stu was supposed to be there for that trip, and he was so ill that he couldn't come. And so John and Paul end up spending the time that they have there with Jürgen. And this is just how history has changed. One tweak to plans, and suddenly everything is different, and suddenly they come back with these haircuts. And who knows if they would have done that had Stu been there. They might have been out doing something entirely different. So it's so interesting. All right.
And in the book, by the way, that to me is a very interesting chapter for 1964, because I made it all about the hair, even though the hair comes earlier. And yes, this image that you're about to show, quite famous for us Beatle fans. It's David Bailey, who was then, like them, a working class, I'd say creative, coming up through a society that at the time had very rigid social structures and hierarchies, but it was becoming a meritocracy. So just a little aside on the Bailey shot here, and I love this shot. I fought really hard to get this shot for the book because it shows not only the hair, but it shows why the hair was considered dangerous to the establishment at the time, because it had about it a whiff of effeminacy, which is what made it ultimately so controversial, especially when the Beatles come to North America. It was like, what is this? This is not a buzz cut. This is not masculine norms the way we've been used to for at least since the war years, and but the Beatles were so confident in their sexuality that they had no qualms experimenting with the feminine and bringing the feminine not only into their wardrobe, but into their repertoire as singers, songwriters.
And here is that image, and you notice that they are not even smiling. The whole early part of their career was smile at nothings, as they call it. Here they are able to just look right into the camera. That's when you know you've made it. And the fact that they are positioned where John is just resting his arms on his friend's shoulders. Again, a closeness that America probably hadn't embraced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, freaked the establishment out, and everybody couldn't. They just, even Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, is weighing in, and sociologists, psychologists, everybody wanted to analyze the hair, but not always in a positive way. But the fans, which is again why long hair now becomes the fashion, is because these are completely different, a separation from what they knew. This image that we're about, and pervasive influence of Beatles style on all aspects of pop culture in the day. So here I top it here at the page with an image directly from Help, and it's Millings created all corduroy military-esque ensemble for the Salisbury Plain scene, and just below it is almost an exact replica of this green corduroy cap with jacket in a Sears catalog. That Beatles fashion here is gone mass.
And there is the image for you to see, and the great influence that spread so quickly.
And there's the Beatle cap, we call it the John Lennon hat. That's what it became known as. You have there you go.
Gorgeous cap that she made at HelenAndersonDesigns.com. All right, let me get the next one so you can see. There you go.
Right, of course. This is even with me, it's right. Studying the Beatles, you're looking at them, and it's 1966. You turn the page, it's 1967, and whoa, it's an entirely different look, an entirely different aesthetic, and an entirely new way of being in the world. They're wearing, now John's very overtly wearing his granny glasses. They've got the mutton chop sideburns. The hair is even longer. The wardrobe is definitely wilder, and they're pulling from all kinds of influences. They've gotten rid of their tailor by this time. They've started shopping at this new phenom in London, the boutique. And you can see that especially there in George Harrison's shadow striped jacket, which is from Hung on You. And also the paisley floral shirt, that frill front shirt that John is wearing, that's from a neighboring boutique, Granny Takes a Trip. And he's also wearing a new import in the streets of London. It's an Afghan sheepskin jacket, which was brought in by an entrepreneur. And then I love Paul in this picture too, because he's wearing a very feminizing, flowing scarf. And then look at Ringo, still always, he can really rock a suit, but doing it with such flair, with, a multicolored tie. And they're wearing their pins in this picture, which is, they're of yellow submarines, but that doesn't mean it's a precursor to the film per se. It's that the Beatles were really plugged into protest movements. And these are symbolic of an anti-nuclear armament movement that the Beatles all subscribed to. So the picture in question here is at the Sgt. Pepper launch party at Brian Epstein's Belgrave house. I think it was May 5th, 1967. And wow, it is just dynamite. I love how George's hair is, especially in this picture.
And here is the image for people watching on video. And again, my apologies to people listening on Beatles-Rama, but she's describing this so beautifully for you. And I hope it whets your appetite to get out and get the book. You can go to Southerland, like my maiden name, only it's Sutherland, SutherlandHouseBooks.com, and of course on Amazon and lots of other places to get the book. Let's do one more image, and then we want to talk about how you did the research, because wow, you really went in depth about every season in their fashion. But how about this one? Is this one you want to cover?
Oh yeah, this one's incredible and important. It is George Harrison's William Morris you call it that, the William Morris upholstery fabric jacket, because it was made by an upstart, actually a Savile Row dropout named John Pierce. Still with us, by the way, everybody. You want to buy a John Pierce suit, you know, the maker of so much clothing for the Beatles. He still has an atelier in London's Soho district. I was fortunate to meet him and interview him for the book. Anyway, this jacket is a garment that George Harrison wore to the opening of the recently rebranded Dandy Fashions on King's Road, directly across the street from Mary Quant's Boutique Bazaar. And the Beatles invested in the second fashion enterprise for them, the first being the Apple Boutique. And this was now Apple Apple Tailoring. And George wore this knockout jacket. And years later, decades later, the British government turned the garment into a postage stamp to commemorate the greatest hits of British fashion.
Here it is, everyone. That is a killer jacket. I vacillate, maybe you do too, on who really is the most fashionable Beatle, because many times I think it's Ringo. He really always is leading edge. Then you go back and look at like 65 when John's wearing the polka dot shirt and that white jeans jacket. And then there's George, of course. I mean, they were all completely different and fashion leaders.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm often asked that who was the most fashionable. Now, in terms of the culture, it was George Harrison, who was often identified as best pop star, you know, in contests in some of the teen or fashion magazines of the day. And I do deliberately open the book with George Harrison because he did lead the way in many of the group's fashion choices. He's quite intrepid with his fashion choices. But there was no way that one of them was more fashionable or more fashion conscious than the other. Just like we all know about the music, you know, they were on the exact same wavelength. They all had a very deep connection to fashion. I took pains to try to show that relationship to fashion before they knew each other, before they were Beatles. Each individual Beatle had a personal relationship and a bona fide relationship to clothing and fashion from the get-go. And I do argue that if the Beatles hadn't vibed on that level of looks, like John, when he first clapped eyes on Paul, I think he's cool. And when Paul first saw John, it was a similar sentiment. You know, they gravitated to each other because of that, I guess you'd say, elusive idea of cool. What is cool? What is, you know, that intangible flavor that makes you stand out. And the Beatles all had that and all appreciated it in each other. And they took inspiration from each other. And just a quickie, when I was doing the research, you can't believe how many instances, when you look at the pictures as intensely as I did, they're swapping clothes all the time.
All the time.
All the time. So if it was George who wasn't, well, trust me, John's wearing it next to Paul, or, you go, what the heck? And especially just recently, I noticed that Paul and John are wearing the exact same floral frill front shirt that I just said John's wearing at that Sgt. Pepper launch party. Well, they're both wearing it, a similar version of it when they meet the Maharishi. Check it out. You're going to see it. So that by this time, that's not stage clothing. They don't have to dress alike. They don't have to buy the same identical look, but they're dressing the same. Because they really were on this. They had such a synchronicity and chemistry, and it blew me away. You can see I'm still so excited about all that, what the fashion and clothing reveals about them.
Yeah, they in Help, when John is getting ready to plunge into that pool and he says,
Yeah.
I can't swim. He's wearing this blue turtleneck with a brocade.
Oh, yes, I know that.
Mm-hmm. And then a couple of days later, Ringo's wearing it in a fashion shoot. The polka dot shirt, both Ringo and John wore. I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Well, just that, like, how Ringo's famously said, I was born a single child, but I have 3 brothers. I was thinking it was a little bit, but these must be really close brothers, because they wore each other's clothes for sure.
Yeah.
I think you were the one who told me that actually it's John and Ringo who most swap the clothes together.
All the time. All the time.
That is quite fascinating.
We're the same size, but obviously I'm so excited that I'm just running way past time, but we want to hear one really important thing, and that is, so you are a dance critic and a music critic and a pop critic, and now you journey into the world of fashion. Tell us how you did the research for the book.
Oh my goodness, that is an enormous, it was enormous enterprise. On and off, it did take me 10 years to do. Maybe just a quick illustration of that. I wrote 500 years of ballet history in 6 months. Why was that a lot? Not easy. Trust me, all of the books are difficult, as you know. But in the sense, the case of the ballerina, there was a lot of documented history already. There was a precedent to draw from. In my case, there was no precedent to draw from. I will say that there is one book out there called Fab Gear by Paolo Hewitt, who did attempt to document some of the Beatles' looks, but there was sort of, in my opinion, questionable analysis and omissions, which opened the door wide open to a project like mine. But easier said than done, because it was also trying to discover magazines I'd never heard of before, trying to find people who were witnesses, like John Pierce, whom I just referenced, and getting them before they sadly passed away. That happened a few times. I tried to get someone to talk to me, and they pass away because of a certain age. So the research was phenomenal, and it wasn't just about fashion. I wanted to immerse myself in the decade. I'm fortunate. I love my Toronto Public Library system, and we have an incredible reference library. We call it the Brain. And for instance, one thing I did, they have every issue of Life magazine on the open shelf on the 5th floor, which is where you can find me if you're looking for me in downtown Toronto in the library. And I read every single issue without doing anything on Beatles, just looking at the advertisements, reading all the commentary, just to really get into the headspace of the 60s. And then I was reading British, like serious British history, culture history, pop history. I wanted to know about the economics. I read history of advertising. I read histories of menswear. Then, of course, I do have, as you've kindly pointed out, an enormous background in watching performance and analyzing dance, movement, costume on bodies, how it moves. I have a real, I guess I've honed that skill. And I had a stint as my newspaper's senior fashion reporter, where I got to look at fashion up close. So it was kind of drawing upon all that. And then, of course, you pointed out all those books. I read almost all those books that you pointed out. You know, you wanted also to know about the band. And of course, really tune in. You know, that was a great inspiration. Even, yeah, Mark did a lot of great study of early Beatles fashion choices, but it was his flavor of writing, of bringing the music to life. You know, so that also was part of the research.
It is incredible. It really is. And you encapsulate it. I mean, you would think that this is like 3,000 pages because it could have been, but you keep it at a reasonable limit so that anyone can pick Fashioning the Beatles, the looks that shook the world, up and enjoy it in a reasonable amount of time. You will love this book. You will love the photos. You will love the way it's put together. You will love the artistry of it. And if you want to learn about the Beatles, and you can probably read this in 3 or 4 days if you sit down and read and enjoy it with a cuppa. You're going to know about their music, and you're going to know about their camaraderie, and you're going to know about their history, much, much more than just about their style. Everything is in it. It's a great book. How can people follow you, not at the Toronto Library, but on social media? And how can they get the book?
That's so kind again. Thank you very much. It is available in the United States through Barnes and Noble. And I know certain, like when I was in New York, I saw it at Rizzoli bookstores. So certain bookstores have it beyond Barnes and Noble. It also is available on Amazon, both .ca and .com, and anywhere else in the world. My publisher, you've kindly pointed that out, that you can order it through the website there, Southerland House Books. And there is information. I actually have the domain name DeirdreKelly.com, and that's DeirdreKelly.com. And there's information about the book there. And as well, I am on Instagram at Kelly Deirdre, because my name is very common Irish name. So I say I'm quite pleased I got the domain name for the website. I'm sure there's all these Deirdre Kellys just hate me. But anyway, so I've got at Kelly Deirdre for Instagram. And then on X, it's Deirdre_Kelly, again, because somebody else scooped me. And then I'm on Facebook with some of the various Beatles communities, which again, I wanted to thank you for mentioning that I've been a Beatles fan forever. People was like, oh, especially the dance community, like, oh, I didn't know you. So I'm not telling you about it all the time. So lots of things have been incredible about the book and how well it's been received, but it's being embraced by people like you. You know, I've known of you for years, and then to be so embraced by the community. And that experience last year at TWA Hotel, my very first fest, and I'm hearing Beatles music all the time. And I was with other people that, love it. It was like coming into the secret society that I've always wanted to be. And then we weren't so secret, we were legion. And it was so incredible.
It's a family for sure. And
yes,
we invite, both Deirdre and I invite all of you to join us August 8th, 9th, and 10th at the Fest for Beatles fans at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago.
yes.
It is so much fun. And if you've never been to a fest, you're missing out, because it is everything that she just said and more. It is a family, and we just enjoy seeing each other and sharing our stories and splitting a pizza. It's a great time. And Deirdre, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You get two Irish girls together, and
the gift of the gab, right?
we never stop. But the Fashioning the Beatles is so special, and I urge all of you to get your own copy. You will absolutely love it. We hate to say goodbye, but we must. And for those of you who don't know, Some Forever, this is the bad copy, which came out not printed well, is being redone. I got an email from them today saying that they have got the first run with the cover on, and they're going to send us a proof. So hang on, it's going to be coming soon. This is the end of 1965. Unfortunately, I don't have the gift of condensing down. This is like almost every day from August 13th of 1965, and the boys landed in America on the brink of Shea Stadium to the end of 1965, their very last tour of the UK. It was so touching and sad and bittersweet, but this is one of my favorite books in the series, and it will be out for that Chicago Fest. So thank you all for joining us today on Tell Me Why. Thanks to everybody listening on Beatlesorama. And most of all, thank you, Deirdre Kelly, for being with us to share your beautiful and informative and great book.
Thank you so much again for the honor.
Well, see you all soon, hopefully at the Fest for Beatles fans. And from Deirdre and me, tra and shine on.